Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of In Lay Terms. I'm your host, Payman Ascari, and today with us is Mr. Larry Worthen. How are you doing?
I'm great, Payman. Nice to see you. Nice to be on your program.
I'm actually really excited. So you and I had a long conversation on the phone, and I was just blown away by everything you said. So I'm certain that the audience will love to hear what you have to say as well.
Thanks.
So to get everyone started, can you please tell us a little about yourself, who you are, and the organization that you represent?
Yes, I'm the executive director of an organization called the Christian Medical and Dental Association of Canada. We're an association of 1,500 physicians from coast to coast. And the key thing about our organization is we are physicians, Canadian physicians, who are trying to integrate the practice of medicine and dentistry with our Christian faith.
And your faith has put you in odds with a recent ruling by the province of Nova Scotia, correct?
Yes, not by the province itself, but by the College of Physicians and Surgeons. They're the group. It's created by government, but is independent of government, and they regulate the practice of medicine in Nova Scotia. And they are considering a policy now that would require physicians to do an effective referral for things like MAID, abortion, and gender reassignment. And so our doctors, 28 of our doctors, have said they cannot participate in these types of practices. And so we're kind of in a battle right now with the college around this issue.
Okay, before getting to the main subject, would it be accurate to say that these colleges are sort of self-regulating, self-policing organizations like the bar in the US or the BC Law Society over here?
It's very similar to that type of thing. The idea is that Canadian society wants to have self-regulating professions. And so these colleges are set up at arm's length from government. They're a creature of government. They're created by legislation, but they're made up of councils of general public and practitioners, and they kind of set the rules for the practice of medicine in each province.
And last question before we move on. This council that you said is practitioners and the general public, is there anyone from the government, the cabinet, on that council in Nova Scotia?
I don't believe there would be a government rep. I don't believe so. I think there's representation from the medical school, but not from the government.
Okay. So the next question, and I'm going to progressively probably get more on your nerves as I ask these simple questions.
That's okay. That's okay. Not at all. I'm happy to be here.
So MAID, I think it's medical assistance in dying,
That's
which
right.
is it's euthanasia.
Yes.
Can you describe for us from a medical perspective? This might seem like a silly question, but what is euthanasia and what is the moral argument against it?
Okay. Well, MAID in Canada, medical assistance in dying, consists of two types of killing of patients. One is euthanasia, which is where the patient gets a lethal injection and dies that way. And the other is assisted suicide, where the physician and the pharmacist create a drink, a liquid that has poison in it, and the person basically drinks that, and that kills them. The vast majority of assistance in dying, medical assistance in dying in Canada, is euthanasia. That's the vast majority, 97, 98%. The moral argument against it is that in the Christian faith and actually in the Judeo-Christian tradition, killing a person is immoral. It's wrong. It's evil to destroy human life. Many other faiths agree with that. For instance, Muslim doctors have the same concerns about it as we do. And in actual fact, it extended, for about 2,400 years, back even before the time of Christ. Hippocrates developed an oath for medical practitioners that said that a doctor would do no harm to the patient. In other words, a doctor would never kill a patient. And so the moral and ethical arguments against this are, first of all, it's part of the Judeo-Christian heritage, thou shalt not kill. And second of all, the relationship between a physician and a patient is very uneven. The patient's often in a very vulnerable state. And the concern is that if a doctor has the capacity to be able to recommend death to the patient, that the patient may actually follow up on it and take that option in some cases where it would not be in their best interest to do so.
How is this not murder?
Well, from a Judeo-Christian perspective, it is murder. From a moral perspective, it's murder. This all started in Canada because of a decision in a case called Carter versus Canada, where one BC Supreme Court judge, one judge acting alone, held that it was unconstitutional not to allow a doctor to kill a patient. And that decision eventually made its way to the Supreme Court of Canada, where they approved it. And the criteria that were developed by the judge have therefore become part of Canada's laws. And every time Parliament tries to restrict that, that law developed by Parliament is struck down by the courts. So we're in a situation where the courts have initiated this. They've made an exception to murder in the criminal code. And the exception is if someone falls under these particular criteria, then they would be allowed to have someone kill them.
I thought that Canada was governed under the principle of parliamentary supremacy, and Parliament could create any laws. You're saying that the courts have circumvented that?
Yes, through the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that was approved in 1982 in Canada. Our courts have specifically set a role for themselves that may or may not have been intended by the people who wrote the Constitution. But the courts have basically have gotten into the development of policy. Just from an ordinary civics class, you would recognize that it doesn't make any sense for one judge, no matter how smart they are, to develop criteria for something as complicated as medical assistance in dying or euthanasia. Nevertheless, that's what happened in Canada. And I was just reading the criteria today. Like, our criteria are broader than in the Netherlands, for instance, in many respects. In the Netherlands, you have to try all of the existing treatments before you can get euthanasia. In Canada, you don't. In Canada, you only have to try those treatments that are acceptable to you. So a lot of people don't realize if we had gone and approved of MAID for mental health in Canada, which we are on the verge of doing in March, people could have had their lives ended solely for mental health reasons. And they might only have had to try one type of intervention to deal with their mental illness. So this is rapidly becoming a situation where it is quite easy to get euthanasia in Canada. And not only that, we are delivering it through the whole healthcare system in Canada, which is unique as well in the world. So it's readily accessible. The criteria are some of the broadest in the world. And so it is rapidly becoming a key component of the healthcare system in Canada. The proponents of euthanasia refer to it as a therapeutic intervention. So if it's a therapeutic intervention, then I've always asked, what's the incentive to provide other services?
Is there any precedence for this? Like, how far back in history do you have to go until society encourages people to kill themselves?
Well, the precedent, of course, is prior to the time of Hippocrates, when the medical profession itself was very much mistrusted because doctors could be paid off by people, other people, to take their patients' lives. But I think the most immediate precedent for us is in 1933 in Nazi Germany. The Nazi government there decided to implement euthanasia for persons with disabilities or people who were quite ill. And that started in 1933. It was the concept of mercy killing. And we all know where that led to. And so for many years, the Western nations completely shied away from this, realizing that it was a slippery slope and could eventually lead to people dying against their will.
Larry, I had a follow-up question. Where does this whole Nazi Germany thing we were talking about, where does this lead? Does it lead to eugenics, like killing of cripples, or does it lead to something more sinister? I don't know what could be worse than eugenics, but like slavery or something. What do you think? What's going to happen?
Well, I think we've already seen signs of what's going to happen. We're experiencing it 8 years into the legalization. Just in the last weekend, we had a quadriplegic in Montreal who got ill and went to the emergency room. They couldn't find a bed for him in the hospital, so for 4 days he lay on a stretcher. The problem is, with his disability, he needed a mattress that would shift his weight to keep him from getting bed sores. Because he was on a stretcher, he didn't have that mattress, even though the health department has those mattresses available. They get him one. And so as a result, he got very severe bed sores after 4 days and ended up asking for euthanasia because of the bed sores. So what this shows directly and dramatically is that the weakness and failings of our healthcare system are being dealt with by euthanasia. So this man's response for asking for euthanasia was that he didn't want to be a burden. Now, the problem is that there's something called ableism in our society. A large proportion of Canadians believe that patients with disabilities are not as valuable as patients who do not have disabilities. And many people feel that a person with a disability, their life is not worth living. Sometimes that can get internalized in people who have disabilities. And for this gentleman, it had been internalized. When you have a disability, you're constantly dealing with a society that does not make life easy for you. You're constantly dealing with challenges. And so one more challenge is you go to the emergency room, they won't get a mattress for you. You end up getting bed sores. And finally, you just say, well, what's the point? I might as well just give in to this and end my life. And I think that's already what's happening in Canada. There's case after case of this. Another young woman, 27 years old, who is on the autism spectrum, lives with her dad, decided that she would apply for euthanasia. She got it for simply being on the autism spectrum, perfectly healthy in every other way. And, even though the father tried to challenge this, there is actually no appeal. The decision of the doctor is final. And a lot of people said, well, we already said that for mental health reasons, people should not get MAID. But the problem is that they're saying, well, this is not mental. This is more of an organic disability that this young woman has, and so therefore she should qualify for that. So what that means is that if you have certain disabilities, if you are on the autism spectrum, like I have a grandson who's on the autism spectrum, well, then I have to worry about him at a low point, not feeling accepted in society because he has a disability, perhaps getting depressed and discouraged, that a healthcare provider will come along and propose euthanasia as an option for him, and he could end up dying. Just imagine the father in Calgary trying to fight against this and not having any say in whether his daughter lives or dies. That's the situation we're already in. We can't look ahead, but in the Netherlands, where this has been around since 2002, we saw an increase in the number of patients after euthanasia was legalized. We saw an increase in the number of patients who were dying because of increased amounts of painkillers, something called palliative sedation. Now, palliative sedation in Canada operates currently at about 0.1 to 1% of palliative patients. But in the Netherlands, it was astronomically higher. And what appeared to be happening was that what many of the doctors, now seeing that euthanasia was legal, were saying, well, rather than go through all the paperwork, we can just end the patient's life by increasing the amount of painkiller and ending someone's life. I think what happens is that once we allow this, once we say it's no longer murder, once we say it's a medical treatment, then there are huge implications for this, for our whole healthcare system. I'm quite certain that the average Canadian didn't understand what they were getting into if they supported MAID in the beginning. It was sold as something that would only be used infrequently. Now in Canada, we're over 4% of all deaths, and it's even higher in Quebec and in British Columbia, as high as 7% in Quebec and 5.5% British Columbia. So Quebec would have the highest rates in the world, for instance, of euthanasia at this point.
That figure of 4%, that's not 4% of deaths. That's 4% of deaths in hospitals, right?
4% of all deaths.
That includes homicide, that includes natural death.
Yeah. It's one of the highest causes of death in Canada right now. And we estimate that probably 60,000 people have already died by this since 2016. And the numbers grow 4% exponentially every year.
That's shocking. I thought it was going to be like 1% or 1%.
Well, the thing is that Canadians got sold, a bill of goods. I remember the day that this court case went through the Supreme Court of Canada. I remember Peter Mansbridge on the CBC saying this was only for people that were in tremendous physical pain who are already at end of life. And if you read the original decision by that one Superior Court judge in BC, you realize the criteria were much broader than that. They already had disabilities in it. And so when the federal government tried to say that death must be reasonably foreseeable, thereby protecting people with disabilities, the courts in Quebec were quick to shoot that proposal down. So that's what I'm saying, that the actual criteria are extremely broad. Not only that, there's no appeal. It's the subjective opinion of two doctors, any two doctors, and people can doctor shop. For instance, there was a situation in Newfoundland and Labrador where no doctor in Newfoundland or Labrador would end the life of this patient through MAID, they said they didn't qualify. And the patient's family got Dying with Dignity to send in doctors from Ontario, and they euthanized the patient. So the problem is that, like I said, there's no appeal. You just have to search for a doctor. You can get assessed by 99 doctors, and if the 100th agrees that you should die, then you will die, and there's no appeal or even review of the decision.
So I, from what I'm hearing, this came out of the courts, and I can understand why the courts, who just want to grow their power, are clinging on to this ruling. But if what the politicians, what's in it for Trudeau to say, all right, guys, we have this tool now, let's use it to kill people? Is he trying to reduce healthcare costs?
Well, I can't reach into the mind of the prime minister, nor would I want to do that. I think that certainly it's certainly part of the progressive playbook. And so I think that to the extent that politicians want to show how progressive they are, this is one way to do it. It's sad that they are doing it at the expense of vulnerable people, because while many people who are privileged think this is a great thing because when they die, they don't want to have to depend on the healthcare system. When they die, they want to stay in control of their life. They don't want the sense of being vulnerable. For those privileged people, this is a great thing. For the vulnerable people who are the byproduct, the collateral damage of this policy, then it's extremely serious. For that poor man, the quadriplegic who couldn't get the right care. For the person on the autism spectrum disorder in Calgary who can't get the right support for people with autism. For all of these disabled people who are unable to get support from society, then they're the ones who are bearing the brunt. They're the ones who are experiencing the lack of hope, and they're the ones who are being offered euthanasia. A lot of people don't realize that alternative programs, in some cases, are being cut to make money for euthanasia. So there's a couple of, in Ontario, a couple of the LHINs told their palliative care groups that they must provide MAID within their current budget. So that means that money is being taken away from palliative care and being turned over to MAID. So, and also because the greatest amount of our healthcare dollars are spent in the last year of life, government stands to make a lot of money by approving this as well. So I think that's kind of a byproduct, and it's extremely concerning in a time when there's tremendous pressure on our healthcare system that this is part of the solution to the problem.
Turning back to Nova Scotia and your organization, what are you doing to push back against this?
Well, we're really working very, very hard to make the general public aware of what's going on in Nova Scotia. I personally, have been preaching in different churches and explain to people what's going on. Just this weekend, for instance, we were able to get 324 letters from one church alone to the Minister of Health asking them to intervene so that our 28 doctors who are unable to practice will be able to continue to practice in Nova Scotia. We don't think that the Minister of Health wants our doctors to be unable to practice, but the problem is that ideology plays a big part in this. And some people feel that if doctors are not prepared to participate in their patients' euthanasia, that they're not really good doctors, and they should actually leave the medical profession altogether. The downside of that is that if you happen to be a person who doesn't believe in euthanasia and you want a doctor to fight for you to continue to live, then there's going to be less and less options available if our doctors are unable to practice in your province. So I think people need to realize that in order to maintain the diversity of the healthcare system and to ensure that you have doctors who are prepared to go to bat for you to continue to help you to live, you're going to need to support doctors like ours across the country.
Let's go back to something you said earlier. This is coming out of the colleges, correct? And the colleges, they're appointed by the physicians, right? The council is elected by the physicians?
Some of the members of the council are elected by physicians, and some are appointed by government. They are supposed to be representing the interests of the average person. Now, all of this is different, of course, in your home province of BC, where government plays a much stronger role over the governance of the medical profession in that province. But in most cases, the other 9 provinces, the scenario is something similar to what I've just described.
The reason I ask is, have you considered lobbying the physicians to vote out the ones that are bringing this?
We've certainly considered that. It just depends upon how strong our medical lobby is in each province. Like in Alberta, we've been successful at that, influencing the votes of physicians for particular candidates. I think informally in other provinces that works as well, but it's just an evolution of our strategies as we move forward to try to continue to provide service to our patients.
Okay, fair enough. What are your my question was about Christianity. What are your thoughts on the federal government, just governments in general, essentially declaring war on Christianity?
Well, it's extremely disturbing. It's almost contempt in some quarters. I've done this type of advocacy work across Canada, and I have generally found that if you establish your credibility, and approach people in a professional way, you normally get a very professional response. But there seem to be elements here in Nova Scotia who just don't believe we should have any say. And certainly, elements at the federal level where I definitely got the feeling that our voices were just not as appreciated or understood as other people's voices. I think that definitely at the federal level, I have strong concerns about the willingness of government to listen to the concerns of people who are grassroots and who have a Christian basis.
If I'm not mistaken, there was another development out of Nova Scotia. Please forgive me if I mix up the maritime provinces. The government now has the right to access your medical records. Is that correct?
Yeah, you know what? I have to admit, I'm not really familiar with that particular issue. I really don't know much about that.
No, it's okay. I read that somewhere, and it's parallels what's going on in BC. We can come back to the medical side. I'd like to take you out of your comfort zone and ask you about another one. Are you familiar with Bill 63?
No, I'm not. Which one is that? Is that the online harms?
The online
harms bill?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
No, I haven't. To tell you the truth, during Lent, I gave up watching the news. And so I passed a much more peaceful Lent than I have in the past, because I wasn't watching what the latest thing was coming down from the federal government. So I really couldn't comment on that bill because I'm not familiar with it.
I'll tee it up so that it's sort of medically relevant. I read through Bill 63, and I read a large portion of the World Health Organization pandemic treaty, and there are many parallels. The one that's a big one is censorship. So in the case of Online Harms Act, they use child pornography, the prevention of the proliferation of child pornography, to get that in through the door. In the case of the pandemic treaty, they're using the argument that there was vaccine misinformation or whatever and whatnot. What are your views on the direction the world is going in?
Well, I think I'm most comfortable talking about issues like abortion, euthanasia, which our organization has consistently spoken out against, because we believe it is beneath the dignity of the human person. But what I would say is this, generally speaking, you can look at a number of issues. It just seems to me that the powerful are coming up with proposals and policies that benefit the powerful. And they are not considering the vulnerable, who are generally speaking voiceless in some of these concerns. So a perfect example of this is euthanasia, where those who have privilege, want to have the illusion of owning their lives, and so they allow for this to happen. But they don't think about the quadriplegic or the person with on the autism spectrum disorder who doesn't have appropriate care, who might not have a good support group, who might not be able to call in favors from other persons of privilege in their community. And it's those people that we need to be concerned about. I think in terms of the direction of society, it's all well and good for people to assert their individual rights, but people must care about others as well, particularly the vulnerable. I remember a few years ago, there was a public consultation in Barrie, Ontario, when I was there, and the consultation was about euthanasia. So I intentionally sat down with some of the supporters of Dying with Dignity who were in a group, and their constant refrain was, well, it's my body, it's my choice. What right does anyone have to tell me what to do? And if I want to end my life with euthanasia, then I should be able to do that. And I said to them, well, what about, let's say your son or daughter has too much to drink one night and jumps in the wrong end of a swimming pool, wakes up the next morning as a paraplegic or a quadriplegic. What would you say to them? And their response was, well, there's social workers to deal with people like that. And it just made me realize that there is absolutely no connection in their own minds between their own right to end their life prematurely and the support and care that people who are vulnerable need. The law has been approved so that after a 3-month waiting period, that same person who is still struggling to adjust to their quadriplegia, that same person could get euthanasia. And my question is, what are we doing? What do we really have a caring country, or do we have a country that is so ruthless that it offers our people with a disability euthanasia as opposed to the type of care and support that they need?
So you brought up another issue I totally forgot to ask you about, abortion. Now that have you here, what is the status? Is my understanding that it's fully legal in Canada, and what is the moral or the Christian argument against abortion?
Well, again, you talked about murder, thou shalt not kill. When you end a person's life in the womb, you're destroying a human life. And there's something like 85,000 surgical abortions a year in Canada. 85,000 people die from euthanasia, boys and girls. And, there was a time when this was justified by images of young girls, maybe as young as 14 or 15, getting pregnant and wanting to be able to kind of undo the mistake that was made. There's also a lot of emphasis on the responsibility of the boys who got involved with this, and I completely agree, boys and men are as responsible for this as women are, because they're the ones who are engaging in sexual relations outside of marriage, where there is a likelihood that pregnancy will result. Certainly, human dignity would indicate that we must treat every human life, whether it's in the womb or not, as an important person, a human person. We know that this is the case biologically and genetically. And our society needs to change again by giving people who are in this circumstance the support that they need to be able to bring that life to fulfillment. It's a terrible, terrible tragedy. But when you look at the statistics today, you realize that this has evolved over time since the original Supreme Court of Canada decision in Morgentaler in 1988. This has evolved over time, so that it's no longer concentrated in the younger age groups. It's pretty well evenly concentrated over women in their childbearing years. And no abortion, and not even any attempt to divert women to other ways of dealing with an unplanned pregnancy. And so the early proposals that this was all because of teenage girls in their younger years, that's just not statistically relevant today. And it turns out that this is being used to basically turn back an unfortunate decision to have sexual relations, in a situation where you're not prepared to receive the child. And the other very high concern about this is the number of children whose lives are ended, who have Down syndrome, for instance, which is not a lethal syndrome, and in many cases may actually be the result of may result in a mild disability, and yet these children are being destroyed in the womb. Also, sex-selective abortions, where certain cultures feel that it's more profitable to have a male heir than a female heir. These things all degrade the specialness, the dignity of human life. And we should, as a society, be doing more to protect children in the womb and to give parents the ability to be able to bring that child to term, to bless all of us in our society. But there's no doubt in my mind that the abortion license led to euthanasia. When you justify the destruction of life in the womb, then you can just as easily justify the destruction of life that's already born. As a matter of fact, a lot of people might not realize this, but the Collège des Médecins in Quebec came to a federal committee and recommended that euthanasia be extended to children who are already born, who are up to a year old, who have a disability. When they get into that, that's clearly eugenic. But all I'm saying is that it is the logical extension, destruction of life in the womb, to say that if children are born live, then we should be allowed to destroy them as well. And if we're doing this up to 1 year, how long is it until we say 3 years or 4 years or 5 years or 12 years? And then we will actually be people who are not able even to consent themselves. And this is into eugenics. When you asked me before about Nazi Germany, I think we are well on our way well on our way. And if not directly in that situation, certainly if we follow the advice of the Collège de Médecins de Quebec, we very much in the situation of doing eugenics.
Yeah, it's insanely disturbing. Um, I guess, Mr. Worthen, we're coming to the end of the episode. And what advice would you have to Canadians who are not happy with MAID and who want to dispose of it? Like, what would you recommend they do?
Well, I think that, part of the reason that this has been allowed in is because of a lack of public awareness. MAID proponents will constantly quote the polls that say something like 70% of Canadians are in favor of this. Well, I would say that 70% of Canadians that are in favor don't really understand what's going on. They can't follow the news reports. The news reports don't give you the other side. And I think if Canadians knew what was going on, they would be opposed to it. I think a good start was the fact that MAID for mental health seems to have stalled. But you need to remember that was just a single move by the government to delay it until 2027, until after the election is over. So I think that the first thing you need to do is when the federal politicians come to your door, you need to make them accountable to this. You need to ask them, where do you stand on MAID? We need all kinds of changes. We need for the government to completely set aside the idea of MAID for mental health. We need the government to completely set aside the idea of MAID for people who are children. We need to completely set aside the idea of killing children under the age of 1. And we need to find ways to make the MAID providers more accountable. For instance, there could be an appeal of a decision that could be allowed. That if family members and loved ones, people who are dying from MAID, are concerned that the actual reasons are not there, they should have standing in court to be able to challenge that. It's a human life after all, and we can't be too careful about this. My hope is that we will, bit by bit, gradually recognize that this is a barbaric way of dealing with our vulnerable people. And we need to provide additional services and care for people so that they aren't pushed to this desperate situation. And if any of your viewers would like to write their MLAs across Canada, their MPPs, they can go to our website, No Options, No Choice, nooptionsnochoice.com. And there, within about 2 minutes, they can send a letter to their MLAs demanding that there be better services and supports for vulnerable people, that they are not driven to end their life via MAID.
That was going to be my next question. So we'll put that URL up
Thank you.
When we upload the video. It's nooptionnochoice.com.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Is there anywhere else? Can they follow you on social media, or is there any way they can donate to your cause?
Yeah. If you want to donate to CMDA Canada, we very much appreciate that. You can go to our website, cmdacanada.org, and there is a donate button. If there's any physicians out there that are interested in finding more information about us, you can also check our website. And for any of your viewers that might be in Nova Scotia, you can certainly assist us. Again, nooptionsnochoice.com. You can go on there and fill out a letter to Nova Scotia politicians to encourage them to support our conscience battle.
Well, Larry, I know I learned a lot on this episode, and I want to thank you for coming on. And I'm sure my audience appreciates everything you shared with us.
Well, I want to thank you for giving us this opportunity. We really appreciate it. It can be disturbing news. I speak across Canada all the time to people who are totally shocked at what's happening. But I think the thing is that once we realize it, then we can take action to make changes. And we really need to do that. And I would encourage any of your members who come from a faith background to pray for us, because we certainly need your support as we battle some of these tremendously strong forces that are in favor of death in Canada.
Well, I for one am rooting for
Thanks
you, Larry,
so much.
and I'm sure you won't give up easily.
Thank you.
So good luck.
God bless you.